We're off again, this time taking a 2-week road trip through Southern Ireland. Our plane arrives in Dublin, and we have a full day planned on our drive to Kilkenny. Unfortunately, we burnt 2 hours of that just getting the rental car. But we're finally on our way to the little village of Enniskerry for a quick lunch at the quaint cafe Poppy's before heading on to Powers Court House and Gardens. The house was originally a 13th century castle. It had gone through many renovations, but in 1974, a fire basically gutted the whole structure. We were surprised that the house now consisted of mainly retail shops, but it's the beautiful gardens that make the visit worthwhile. Well, we still have a 2.5-hour drive to get to Kilkenny. Tomorrow's a holiday, and we soon found that most of the restaurants are either booked or closed. So we ended up eating at the hotel and turning in early to get some well-deserved sleep. The next morning, we take the short walk to Kilkenny Castle. After watching a short movie explaining the history, we started our self-guided tour. Both the building and the rooms were wonderfully restored, considering that it was in such poor shape in 1967 that it was transferred to the city for just £50. We did find it odd that scattered among the many antiques were a few modern art pieces that just didn't seem to fit in. After leaving Kilkenny, our next stop is an hour away at the Rock of Cashel. The Rock of Cashel consists of the ruins of a medieval fortress and a 13th century cathedral.
So this is Cormac's Chapel, and this is known as the Jewel in the Crown. It is our most treasured building on the site. There are a couple of reasons for that, architectural reasons and of course the frescoes that are inside. Now this chapel was built in 1127. A lot of people think they're looking at a newer building. You're looking at the second oldest building on the rock, and it was completed in 1135. This is actually an example of Hiberno-Romanesque. The Romans actually gave Ireland the name Hibernia. It means land of never-ending winter, which is quite an apt name on most days. So the only Irish architectural feature is the high-pitched roof, because of course we need high-pitched roofs in Ireland to allow all that wonderful rainwater to come off. These arches here are known as blind arcading. A common question we get asked is were there ever windows there? Well, the answer to that is no. Bear in mind it's a fully stone roof, so extremely heavy roof, so windows would not have been a great idea to put into those arches. It's just a design feature. Another interesting thing is this tympanum above the doorway. It depicts an animal. I'm going to ask you what you think what the animal is.
Rhinoceros.
Well, that was a quick. Everyone says rhino or hippo, which seems to be the consensus, but I don't know if there were many hippos or rhinos in Ireland in 1127. I don't know, maybe they were in the woods or something. It's possibly the bull of St. Luke, because he was associated with stonemasons. But that is not gospel. Everything is open to speculation when it comes to imagery. Perhaps some of you have already noticed something a bit off though about the arch I'm standing underneath. It is actually off-centre, which is odd because clearly they are exceptionally talented at engineering things and building things. They obviously like symmetry as well. You can see that in their designs. They're well able to make symmetrical things. So we can only speculate as to why that is. Now there are some theories. Some are a bit more bizarre than others. I'll give you some examples. For instance, if you have a Rick Steves book, perhaps an older version, you will read that, well, he suggests that it represents Jesus' head to one side on the cross, and that's why the arch is off-centre. Wouldn't be believing that one myself, but that is a theory. Another theory is perhaps it is a purposeful mistake, because that was an idea back then, that only God was perfect, so you would make things imperfect, or with an imperfection in it. Another theory is they had structural difficulties, because when they excavated past this wall here, they did find foundations. So perhaps they did actually try to build further out there, but they just had structural issues dealing with the immense weight of this type of arch. That would be my belief, that they had structural issues and simply had to bring it in. But if you look at the carved faces all around, you'll see some of them look a bit unusual. In terms of what they are, they're really a blending of paganism and Christianity, which is something very evident in Ireland anyway. We became a very Christian country for quite a while, but we were a very pagan country. And that did not happen overnight. We didn't just relinquish paganism and assimilate Christianity immediately. You have that blending in Ireland. So these are known as grotesques, not gargoyles as some people call them. A gargoyle actually has to have water coming out of its mouth. So the pagan element of grotesque is warding off evil and fairies, and possibly leprechauns. And the Christian element of it is in many ways a warning. So it might look like a lovely animal to us, but it would scare the hell out of them back there. In terms of other unusual things, at the end of the chapel down there, there is a sarcophagus. Sarcophagus comes from the Greek flesh eater, and it's a little bit gruesome because that's exactly what it does. When you would put a body inside the sarcophagus, there are two holes in the back of it. And they would put quicklime on top of the body, which effectively ate into the body like acid. And through those holes in the back, all of the gases, fluids, all that fun stuff went out the back of it. So they would have actually reused sarcophagus. I suppose you could say they were environmentally friendly, a little bit gruesome. But what's unusual is the design element that is used in it, because it is a Viking design. It's in the Erne style from a town in Norway. So of course when the Vikings came here first, they had a great time plundering the country, but over time they actually assimilated into our culture and intermarried. Because why wouldn't you intermarry with Irish? Well, we did take things from their cultures, and they also took from our culture. And it's in the figure 8, so signifying infinity, it's intertwined serpents.
It was going on 3 by the time we got to Ladies' Well restaurant, where we had a chicken panini and some seafood chowder. We're spending the next couple of nights in the city of Cork. We get in around 6 o'clock, just enough time to wander the city a bit before hitting the pubs. The next morning we went to the English market. We got there about 8:45, and they were still setting up. It seems like things get started a little later here. The market was a lot smaller than we expected, and we were soon on our way to our next stop, St. Finbarr's Cathedral. Wanting to avoid some of the rain, we take the short drive to Blarney Castle. On our way up to the castle, we pass by what's called the dungeon entrance, which are tunnels underneath the towers. After making our way up the tower, we're treated with wonderful views of the countryside and gardens, before standing in line to kiss the Blarney Stone. Well, I didn't do it, but Marianne got down to take a closer look.
Okay. That was X.
As we descend the spiral staircase, we pass barren stone rooms before entering the gorgeous gardens. On the way to the gift shop, we pass a carriage house filled with some interesting old carriages. The garden has some very creative areas. Passing through these wishing steps takes you down to the boardwalk and water garden. And these standing stones are called the Seven Sisters. After leaving Blarney Castle, we drove to the picturesque seaside town of Kinsale. Well, we were getting hungry, and it was too early for dinner. So as we walked around the town, we found a little cafe called the Lemon Leaf, where we stopped in for some pastries and a hot drink. Arriving back in Cork, we had dinner at Oliver Plunkett, before ending our evening at the pub Signee. Today our drive continues, as we leave Cork on our way to Killarney, with a number of stops along the way. Our first stop is for breakfast, at Lynch's Bakery, in the small village of Macroon. You may wonder how it was driving on the left side of the road. Well, the first day was stressful. It seemed like I had to pay attention to every little thing, including the position on the road and shifting with your left hand. And I think a big part of that was the jet lag and lack of sleep. By the third day, things seemed to be pretty natural. The country roads were narrow, but overall it was a fun place to drive. We were originally going to stop for lunch at St. Finbar Church in Gongambera, but with the rain, we just made it a picture stop. Just outside the church was a stone enclosure with the Stations of the Cross on the surrounding walls. In the wooded mountains of Cork County, we stopped at the interactive sculpture gardens of the U Experience. We were able to talk to the artists Sheena and Kirk Wood before we started our walk along their fantasy-filled trails. It is a collection of interactive art and sculptures set in a beautiful forested landscape. Our drive continues along the wild Atlantic Way and across the Barra Peninsula. We made a quick stop at the Gullivan's Visitor Center. They had some well-done historical recreations, as well as some interesting local crafts. We tasted some pretty good moonshine, and Marianne bought a colorful wool scarf. As we pass through Kenmare, our next stop is the Muckross House. It's a large estate that was built in 1842. We had a guided tour, which told us a lot about its colorful history. Along with the well-restored rooms and gardens, the estate also includes recreations of traditional farms, set up as a village dating from the 1930s and 40s. Unfortunately, we'll have to squeeze that in at a later time. Our last stop for the day is the Torque Waterfall. Hi, we're at the Torque Waterfall, right outside of Killarney, Ireland.
And the mosquitoes are eating us alive.
These beautiful rhododendrons, introduced from Spain, are now considered an invasive species, choking out a lot of the native vegetation. There are many areas where you could see the hillsides just painted in purple. Well, we made it to Killarney. We're here for 4 nights. After we settle in, we get a quick bite to eat before walking the town, visiting some of the pubs.
A big yellow taxi carried me and me bags through the streets and the rain. My poor heart was tumbling around with excitement. I hardly even heard what the driver was saying.
Today we have a full day tour of the Gap of Dunlow. Our day starts out in a ride over the gap by a horse-drawn cart called a trap. We were with another couple from Germany, and our horse's name was Lily.
Yep, what? Oh, now this point here I might get a couple of those small bit of walking if you don't mind. Okay.
Our driver had us walk the final climb to the summit, and I'll have to say I was beginning to feel sorry for Lily. The sheep in Ireland are free range and are primarily used just for meat. At the end of the season they're all herded up, and they can tell who owns which sheep by the colored dye they've put on their back. As we passed the summit, the weather turned, and it started raining, as our ride continued down the other side to our halfway point, Brandon's Cottage. After getting some refreshments here, our tour continues by boat through the 3 lakes of Killarney. Our return trip starts off in Upper Lake with our guide Ducks. He told us a few stories, in between dropping a fishing line into the water to try and catch himself some dinner. Passing the 2 arched bridge, we enter Middle Lake, also known as Muckross Lake. Ducks told us last year the river was very low, and there were a lot of exposed rocks. But that those aren't always rocks. They could also be leprechauns trying to grab the boat.
We were struggling last year here. Now the leprechauns were knocking around this area.
They're really pesky though.
Oh yeah, they're alright. They're meant to come in. I like to fill up the cock's
Very
board if he comes around. So you can see, look, it's very shallow, guys. Very, very shallow. Now we're down to the lower lake. This is the biggest of the 3 lakes.
The lower lake is also called Lolene, and it's the biggest of the 3 lakes. It is from here where our boat ride will end, at the Ross Castle. Unfortunately, no pictures inside, but the Ross Castle is actually what they call a tower house, with stacked rooms connected by a spiral staircase. The design was basically to protect the owners from marauders. That night, we decide to take in a live Irish dance and music show called Gaelic Roots, before making our drive around the Ring of Kerry tomorrow.